It looks like it's begun. NATO is urgently mobilizing its troops. Putin's march on the continent. At this very moment, columns of military equipment are already on the move. An incredible development by Ukrainian engineers. A 100-kilogram bomb on a Ukrainian killer drone that can't be jammed by electronic warfare. One package and an entire Russian assault group just gets blown away. Putin declared that Kupiansk had fallen, but the Ukrainian armed forces gave him a clear response. Moscow's plans have collapsed into the abyss. The Kremlin's funeral for the city turned out to be premature. The Russians are once again falling in droves outside the city. What is happening there right now has driven Russian generals to fits. Washington is in an uproar, the White House is rocked, and something bigger than secret kompromat has been leaked. Britain and France are preparing an airborne landing, a diplomatic Armageddon. Europe is entering a wartime mode, and the West is responding with the strike they've been waiting for. All of this and more in our upcoming report. Hotspot. Europe on the brink of apocalypse. Putin is preparing to send his army onto the continent, and Europeans themselves are now convinced that a Russian invasion could begin at any moment. NATO is urgently moving weapons and troops to the borders with Russia and Belarus, and European defense industries are rapidly restructuring. The countdown is now in days. Watch for all the details.
The danger from the Kremlin is getting closer. The European Union is preparing to confront Putin. At the borders of Russia and Belarus, NATO countries are concentrating weapons and manpower. At the same time, members of the European Parliament are seriously working on a military Schengen.
We must show Putin that Europe is no longer associated with impotence and democracy with weakness.
The Schengen is being prepared in close cooperation with the North Atlantic Alliance. Brussels is taking decisive steps, including a plan to modernize the defense industrial complex. The European Commission has announced the timeline and presented a new package of measures. For military mobility, this will enable the European army to move quickly across EU territory without facing excessive bureaucracy, especially in the event of a potential threat from Russia.
In the defense industry, we will be strong if we are industrially independent, autonomous, and much less fragmented.
Ukraine is acting as an ally. The country will gain access to defense logistics.
We want to expand military mobility corridors in Ukraine. This would serve as a security guarantee, meaning we could provide faster support if needed.
First of all, it is necessary to modernize the infrastructure, digitize procedures, and increase funding. One of the key challenges for EU countries remains ensuring the rapid transportation of troops to potential combat zones.
We can respond to these threats either symmetrically or asymmetrically. We have the full arsenal of tools at our disposal.
At the moment, the threat to the Baltics remains. And in the event of a sudden escalation, for example, the French army would need to cover about 1,500 kilometers to come to the aid of its allies. Although light units are able to move relatively quickly, heavy equipment requires significantly more time and preparation.
Currently, European bridges and railways are not suited for the rapid movement of tanks, soldiers, and military cargo. If transported from the west to the eastern flank, tanks could get stuck in tunnels, tangled in complex bureaucracy, and bridges might not withstand the passage of these vehicles.
Drawing on the experience of the Russian Federation's war with Ukraine, the European Union has devoted significant attention to modernizing critical infrastructure. Transport routes will be upgraded to dual-use standards so that they can serve both civilian and military needs simultaneously. The military Schengen plays a particularly important role in strengthening the defense of the Eastern Alliance. Above all for the Baltic states and Poland.
Everything depends on our position, whether we can deter the enemy or encourage them to aggression.
But not everyone sees the danger from Russia, or they simply try to turn a blind eye to reality by maintaining close ties with the Kremlin dictator Putin.
We're talking about an armament program that will require us to spend every last penny. And this concerns all of Europe. From the statements of several influential leaders, it is quite clear that they want to enter the war.
Germany is doing everything it can to help Ukraine, making every effort to equip the Ukrainian armed forces with long-range missile systems, as well as organizing joint production on our territory.
For several months now, we have been working intensively with the Ukrainian government on implementing long-range weapons projects. The Ukrainian army is being equipped with such systems. We have agreed not to discuss the details publicly. Since we believe that the Russian side should not be informed about the extent of our military support, I can only say that we are doing everything possible to equip the Ukrainian army with weapon systems of the necessary range. And the number of such systems will increase in the coming weeks and months, if necessary, up to and including the production of such weapons in Ukraine itself.
The European Union's military budget is planned to be increased to more than 17 billion euros. In total, At least 100 billion euros are needed to modernize bridges and tunnels and to fully launch 4 corridors for military needs in the European Union. Putin's words cannot be trusted, based on Ukraine's experience.
There's no need to make things up and then form opinions about Russia based on those inventions. There's no need to create an image of Russia as the enemy. For example, people made up that Russia wants to attack Nato. Are you completely out of your mind or what? You're as dumb as this table, honestly. Who came up with this? It's nonsense, you understand? It's utter nonsense.
While the dictator is feeding journalists lies, members of the European Parliament are calling for regular joint exercises and loading tests. They want the European Union to follow NATO's example so that rapid reaction forces can respond swiftly to Kremlin aggression.
Russians are alarmed. A Ukrainian killer drone is carrying a 100-kilogram aerial bomb. And this is pure hell for the Russians. A strike right at the heart of the occupiers. Just one of these packages and an entire enemy group is sent flying into space. All the details coming up.
The Russian Federation's worst nightmare, or rather, the reason it can't sleep, is the new Ukrainian strike drone, the FP2. The FP2 is used for strikes on Russian rear positions. It can also carry an adapted aerial bomb as its warhead.
The FP2 drone is specifically designed for strikes, especially with a penetrating warhead. It's not soft like regular drones. Instead, it uses a 100-kilogram FAB-100 bomb with the tail section removed as its warhead. In other words, this drone can strike targets quite effectively. Because the FAB-100, for example, was the main bomb of World War II, the most widely used bomb. And at the same time, it can hit targets with high precision.
Information about the use of these drones is confirmed both by the occupiers and by Ukrainian soldiers themselves, who show them in action against the enemy across the Donbas. The OFAP marking indicates that this is a fragmentation high explosive munition, designed to strike unprotected and lightly protected targets.
The FP2 can hit both stationary targets and, in certain cases, moving targets as well. And this is a very important point because, for example, it allows you to strike the same Iskander launchers as they move into position.
The Ukrainian company Firepoint has introduced the FP2 strike drone in the middle strike class. It replicates the design of the long-range FP1 drone, which is used to strike targets in the rear of the Russian army.
This is, so to speak, a modernization of the long-range FP1 drone, which has a range of up to 1,400 kilometers. And the FP2 has retained the same design but is smaller in size. Apparently, it has a smaller wingspan, and its range is limited to 200 kilometers. This is where the bulk of the army and front-level depots and logistics centers are located. That's why this strike zone is so important.
The manufacturers offer the system both with a classic stationary launcher and a mobile version for rapid deployment disguised as a regular army truck.
You can drive up as close as possible, say within 10 kilometers of the front line, quickly launch, and then quickly leave the strike zone.
It is noted that the relative cheapness and availability of drones, combined with a heavy warhead, allows Ukraine to partially compensate for the shortage of high-precision missile weapons.
The FP2 can be considered a high-precision munition. Why? It is equipped with a camera. In the area, let's say, about 10 kilometers from the front line, a relay is suspended. And this drone flies like an FPV. That is, it has a camera on board. It strikes the target with precision. In other words, the operator sees the target before striking it.
Experts point out that due to their low flight altitude and sheer numbers, drones can bypass and overwhelm the Russian army's air defense systems, which in certain situations can be more effective than strikes from HIMARS missile systems. Kupiansk, which Kremlin was quick to bury in his propaganda tales, is actually being held with an iron grip by Ukrainian soldiers. What is happening there right now, and what kind of fighting is going on around the city? And why are Moscow's plans once again falling apart?
Another lie from Russian propaganda has trapped the Russians in their own statements.
I can't show certain signs or say specific words live on air. But I understand that today, once again, Putin needs to be sent in the direction of the Russian warship.
Apparently, the top leadership of the Russian Federation forgot to take their prescribed pills. They imagined that their troops had blocked 15 battalions of the armed forces of Ukraine and have full control over Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region. This was reported by the so-called chief of the General Staff Gerasimov during Bunkanov's visit to one of the command posts of the West Group.
The units of the West Group have liberated the city of Kupiansk and continue to destroy the formations of the armed forces of Ukraine, surrounded on the left bank of the Oskil River.
The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine refuted the Kremlin's statement, explaining that counter-sabotage operations and special actions to search for and eliminate enemy sabotage and reconnaissance groups are still ongoing in the city and its surroundings.
As of today, Russian occupiers are only present on the outskirts. Things are going very badly for them there. I wouldn't say the situation there is easy, and accordingly, today it's not exactly rosy. No, today the defense forces there are making considerable efforts to carry out the necessary actions, block the enemy, prevent them from further infiltration, and in fact push them back from the tactical positions that the Russians managed to seize earlier. And this is happening gradually. We are pushing the enemy back from Kupiansk.
The Russian leadership deliberately makes such statements. First of all, they are trying to show Russians that they supposedly have achievements in Ukraine in order to justify their losses. Their economy is going to hell, but they want to prove that everything is going according to plan. This is stated by Yuri Fedorenko, commander of the 429th Separate Achilles Unmanned Systems Regiment.
The Kremlin's second goal is to put pressure on Ukrainians. Similar statements make their way into Ukraine's information space, and it is Ukrainians who can be misled if they do not analyze the information. The third goal is to influence Donald Trump, who doesn't understand the details. Back in Alaska, Putin convinced Trump that he would capture all of Donbass and Kupiansk. That's why the Kremlin is now passing off wishful thinking as reality.
The Kupiansk direction remains a difficult spot on the map of Ukraine. In the city itself, the defense forces managed to tie up the enemy's offensive units, preventing them from imposing intense urban combat. The enemy is suffering huge losses and cannot advance beyond the outskirts. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces continue to gradually, step by step, block by block, push the occupiers back to their homeland.
At the moment, the Russian assault groups in Kupiansk are almost completely cut off from ground supply and logistics. Logistics are being carried out using heavy drones. It should be noted that Russia is not using the tactic of infiltration by small assault groups of up to 3 people. Accumulation and accordingly, further attempts to take control specifically of logistics and the location of Ukrainian defense forces. In addition, the occupiers are using the so-called pumpkin flag tactic. That is, when a group of 2 or 3 people runs into a certain area of Kupiansk, which is in the gray zone, that is territory not controlled by either side, they raise the Russian tricolor flag. They film all of this activity and then present it as so-called objective control data, supposedly showing that these micro-districts of Kupiansk are already, at this very moment, directly controlled by Russian occupation forces.
Right now, one of the main tasks for both sides is to cut off or at least significantly complicate logistics. And despite all the difficulties of the situation, including weather conditions and a shortage of personnel, Ukrainian defenders are handling this masterfully.
A scandal is erupting. Steve Witkoff personally instructed Putin on how to ask Trump for peace on terms favorable to the Kremlin. Top officials from the US and Russia were secretly listened to, and then all the compromising material was leaked into the desert, to the press with details that are already shaking the White House. Now, there is only one main question. Will this derail the peace talks between Kyiv and Moscow? Or will it completely change their course? Watch.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Trump's special envoy, Witkoff, is an extremely pro-Russian diplomat. There have long been rumors that Steve likes Moscow, where he happily eats chebureki for breakfast. But now Bloomberg has published a transcript of a conversation between Witkoff and Putin's advisor, Ushakov, which took place on October 14th. The American directly suggested to the Russian side that they get ahead of Ukraine and talk to Trump before his meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump's friend gave the Russians tips on what words to use to win his heart. The heart of the American president.
Witkov is completely playing on Russia's side, suggesting moves and offering his services, adapting himself as much as possible to Russia. And around Trump, he builds very peculiar phantom semantic castles against Ukraine. Now this has become known.
This leak is one of the biggest scandals in Donald's circle during his second coming to the Oval Office. Political experts are surprised at how the Russians are manipulating the Americans.
In the phone conversation, it is Ushakov who comes across as the professional, easily telling Witkov that Russia, in order to please Trump and recognize his peacemaking efforts, even refused to hold the Russia-Arab summit. But this is a deception, because it was actually the leaders of the Arab countries who refused to go to Moscow, since they started to focus primarily on Trump, and only then on Putin. Ushakov calmly presents the defeat of Russian diplomacy to the inexperienced Witkov as a gesture of goodwill from the Kremlin. And there are many such episodes in these conversations.
A sensational leak like this should have led to personnel changes in Trump's inner circle. But the American president surprised journalists with his apparent indifference. All methods are fair game, Trump assured, justifying himself.
It's a standard thing. You see, he needs to sell this to Ukraine. He needs to sell Ukraine to Russia. That's exactly what he's doing, the one who makes deals.
Amid the scandal, Trump sent Witkov to Moscow for negotiations and his new representative Driscoll back to engage with the Ukrainian side. According to Donald, there is now no deadline for Zelensky to sign the framework agreement. But as analysts claim, the US continues to put pressure on Kyiv. The 47th President of America is not opposed to meeting with Zelensky, but only after he puts his signature on the required document. Meanwhile, the media report that Ukrainian diplomats managed to fend off and reword at least 3 points from the document written and translated by Dmitry Witkov. And during his first visit to the Ukrainian capital, Daniel Driscoll assured Ukrainian military personnel that they would undoubtedly suffer defeat.
The Russians, and as I have already said, the Russians, as I have mentioned more than once from the very beginning, never planned to implement any plan, even if all 28 Russian points had remained unchanged, because the goal of this plan is not to freeze the Russian-Ukrainian war or to stop the Russian-Ukrainian war. The purpose of this plan, which was written by the Russians, is to buy time and to prevent the West from imposing even more sanctions on the so-called Russian Federation right now. In the
White House, they are already worried that the Kremlin might completely abandon the updated peace plan. Now it's interesting to see how Stephen Witkov's trip to the White Stone will end. What treats will be offered and what rewards will be given to their supporter from Trump's circle.
Shock and panic in Moscow. Britain and France are preparing an airborne force for Ukraine. Europe is entering a wartime mode. Diplomatic Armageddon. The Kremlin has crossed the point of no return. And the West is responding with a blow that Moscow never expected, even in its worst nightmares. All the details coming up next. In
the United Kingdom and France, troops are being prepared for possible deployment in Ukraine. And all this is happening precisely at the moment when the US is pushing its own peace plan. A document consisting of 28 points, where one of the key elements directly demands there must be no NATO troops on the territory of Ukraine.
We Europeans have always supported a strong and just peace and welcome any efforts to achieve it. Of course, for any plan to work, Ukrainians and Europeans are needed. So this is absolutely clear. We must also understand that in this war, there is one aggressor and one victim. That is why we have not heard of any concessions from Russia. I mean, if Russia really wanted peace, it could have agreed to an unconditional ceasefire some time ago. Meanwhile, we are once again witnessing the bombing of civilians.
According to Bloomberg, the UK has already identified specific military units that could be rapidly deployed to Ukraine. Defense Minister John Gilly stated that London has updated its plans to send troops to Ukraine as part of a coalition of the willing. This coalition involves about 30 countries led by the UK and France. We
have conducted reconnaissance in Ukraine, so we know which units will be used, how to deploy them, and what tasks they can perform. The plans will be coordinated with other coalition members depending on Ukraine's needs under any peace agreement.
In fact, London is forming the framework for a future presence, the very one that is supposed to come into effect immediately after a possible peace agreement. Britain is already allocating more than £100 million for these purposes, which is about $130 million. This money is for the initial expenses of sending troops.
There are ongoing contacts between Ukraine and its partners regarding needs and the current situation. This is one of the channels through which, meaning at the level of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, at the level of various agencies and different coordination groups established between Ukraine and its partners, this information is conveyed Ukrainian assessments. On the other hand, the partners have direct contacts with civil society organizations in Ukraine through donor organizations and through a whole range of contacts at the embassy. Accordingly, they receive assessments from localities, regions, oblasts, from mayors, from local governments, and from local activists. They also receive information about the situation that is unfolding and about the needs. The third point is that intelligence services and analytical centers are also at work. Therefore, it can be stated with complete certainty and responsibility that the partners have an excellent understanding of the situation and the needs that exist.
The plans include stationing contingents farther from the front line and continuing the training of Ukrainian units both in Britain and directly in Ukraine. After the signing of the peace agreement, a coordination center is to begin operating in Kyiv under the leadership of a British two-star officer. Its tasks include logistics, armament, training, the restoration of Ukraine's ground forces, as well as ensuring air security, which is necessary for the resumption of international air travel. A separate component is the expansion of the Black Sea Naval Group consisting of Turkey, Romania, and Bulgaria. Deepening the security of trade routes and the restoration of maritime exports, according to London's plan, these elements should become key for the post-war period.
If there is a deployment on the continent, British units will be stationed far from the conflict zone. Obviously, this refers to Western Ukraine, where even now, by the way, according to my information, we know that American military personnel are present there. There are quite a large number of instructors who are training personnel, including in logistics and other areas. Accordingly, this also refers to instructors, so hoping that, in the event of a peace process, foreign troops will be stationed on the line of contact is absolutely unrealistic for now. In other words, what is happening now will simply continue as it currently stands. At this stage, it is only possible to talk about, for example, the idea of replacing American instructors and military personnel with British military personnel instead.
Right now, Ukraine and its European partners are facing a difficult choice. On the one hand, there is the need to provide reliable security guarantees and maintain stability after a possible agreement. On the other hand, there is the risk of going beyond the American plan, thereby provoking a new round of pressure from Russia, or even undermining the very architecture of the future peace agreement.
Putin is switching on disaster mode for Russians. Before there was little money, but now there will be none at all. Russia is officially at the top of the world when it comes to robbing its own people. A blow to Russians' wallets, billions will be stolen straight from their pockets. Watch for all the details.
Another tax reform is being prepared in Russia, and its main purpose has already been made clear. More money is needed for the budget, and since there's really nowhere else to get it, the population will have to pay.
The money will go to defense and security, in other words, in bureaucratic terms, to war and the fight against dissent.
The government has approved raising VAT to 22%, and this measure is expected to bring the treasury more than 1 trillion rubles in the very first year. The wording sounds careful. Optimization of the tax burden. In reality, it's an increase in the price of almost everything people buy.
Potatoes. It's just a disaster. I haven't allowed myself to buy cabbage even once. And now I'm giving up on potatoes completely.
Chicken, damn, that's just a whole other story. Chicken meat is already expensive, and don't even get me started on turkey. And fish, it's like 500 and up. I'm outraged about the potatoes. Why are potatoes so expensive?
Russia is entering 2026 in a situation where real incomes have been falling for the 5th year in a row, and the poverty rate just keeps rising. More and more Russian families are complaining that they don't have enough money for even the most basic groceries.
If it weren't for my kids, I would have just starved to death. Honestly, that's the truth.
They won't let you do anything. If anyone tries to speak up, they'll be shut down fast. That's how our government operates, right?
Officials are trying to prove that so-called socially important goods won't go up in price. However, there are no isolated segments in the Russian economy. If taxes go up for businesses and services, logistics, packaging, rent, and equipment all become more expensive. This affects the final prices even of those goods that were supposed to remain stable.
Sadly, this will definitely have an impact. VAT is basically a tax on poverty. It's paid by grandmothers while corporations get it refunded.
Business is also under threat, especially small and medium-sized enterprises.
First, the threshold for receiving VAT benefits is being reduced 6-fold. Second, all businesses in the sector, except those operating in certain industries prioritized by the government, are losing preferential rates for social fund contributions.
Profitability for small businesses is already low, and the VAT increase will become yet another risk factor. For some, it will be the last straw. Those who can will pass the costs on to consumers. Those who can't will leave the market.
The new amendments deal a significant, if not severe, blow to small and medium-sized businesses, which will lose a number of benefits currently in effect.
The share of military spending in the budget has reached record levels, and each new month requires additional funds. Economists warn that under such a scenario, by the end of 2026, the country could face both high inflation and declining incomes at the same time. For the population, this means further impoverishment. For the economy, it means a lack of development.
The funniest thing is that officials even claim that the amendments submitted to the government will benefit the economy, since they will allow the Bank of Russia to lower the key interest rate. First of all, expecting that any tax increase could in principle put the economy on a higher growth trajectory is simply foolish.
The irony is that the VAT increase is presented as a necessary measure, but for those who have long been living on the brink of poverty, it's just further confirmation. The state system is set up in such a way that the most vulnerable end up being the main sponsors of the budget.
That's all for now. For more hot news from the front, tune in to the next episode.